Hey guys, this is Jordan coming to you, this time not from my home in West Virginia, but from my mother's home in McLean, Virginia. This is because I work in Washington, D.C., and so I have to be very, very close to my work just to make it easier for the commute. And for that reason, I still live with my mother. My plan is that I'm going to just go up to the West Virginia house for select weekends and for holidays and such. Um, and of course, work on the layout up there. But for my average day to day, going to work during the week, I have to stay close to the city. And so staying in McLean is the best thing for me. However, today I wanted to talk a little bit about the plan for the coming train layout. Now, I still need to consult with someone to build the train table and so forth because I am not a carpenter. I am not really good with a bandsaw. I don't trust myself to um, cut wood and such without at least some kind of professional help. So until that time comes, everything that I have planned for the layout is still pretty much just files on my computer or just drawings I've made up on paper or stuff that's in my head. But I did want to share some ideas that I had for you guys. Now, in order to do that, I need to talk to you guys about the kind of layouts that I used to have. Now, growing up as a kid, I was pretty much just your typical starting out with model railroading. My layouts were very, very simple. Just a typical loop, maybe with a couple switches. But over time, and as I got older, I wanted to build layouts that were more and more complex. I think most model railroaders can, attest to this. To start with, I wanted to show you guys, this was the very first big layout that I had when I used to live out in California. But I had friends, my grandfather, who of course got me into model railroading, had friends who were also big model railroaders, and they helped me build this train layout. I had this when I was 8 years old, and then when I eventually moved out of California in 2012, I had to break this up and sell it off to whoever wanted to buy it. But during the time that I was living in California, this was what I had to play with. It's just a simple two interconnected loops. The larger loop is 072, the smaller loop is 031, with some switches. So we had a short little yard with a couple accessory tracks here, and also we had another switch that would connect to a passenger terminal here. Pretty basic. It was still complex enough to allow for varied operations, and it was also my first command layout, because of course back then in the 90s, Lionel came out with Trainmaster Command Control, and however, I didn't have a lot of command engines. I only had a couple of them, so that meant that sort of limited what I could and could not do with the layout. As opposed to this, I did have, when I was living in Virginia for a while, back when I was in middle school, I did have a conventional layout. And as you can see, this is what I had in my garage. This is way back in 2003. But I had a simple, it's similar in design, just two interconnected loops. Outer loop is 072, inner loop is 054, with two spurs for switching operations and storing freight tracks. And we also had a trolley line that ran parallel to right behind the passenger terminal, which would have been right around here. Now, those two layouts kind of gave me a general impression of what I wanted to do with layouts going forward, because I think this is the case with pretty much every model railroader out there. But when you're starting out, you essentially just build simple oval or a couple ovals interconnected, and you build a town around it, or some kind of city or landscape around it. In my case here, I had this big city. There was a main street with some houses over here. and some industry over here near the switches. And it was the same thing with the and it was the same thing with the California layout as well. I had roads running through here that led through a main street. There was some industry over near the yard section. There was some farms and residential homes on the other end, and there was a big passenger station there. So that is nice and it's fun, but at the same time, the loop presented a problem. Because in real life, trains don't just jaunt around in a circle. They don't encircle something. They don't go around things. They go to and from things. They are structured point to point. And I always was fascinated with the idea of having the trains at least appear to go somewhere instead of just jaunting around, running a few laps in a circle on the loop, and then come in to drop off passengers at the passenger station and then going back out. I wanted to give the idea that the train was moving from one place to another. Now, before I hit high school, I actually had the idea of connecting, rebuilding the California layout to connect it to have another town or another city, and have the two lines sort of be interconnected, and so that way you could sort of bridge the gap. And it would have made it a little easier to do, because then you wouldn't have to rip everything up. You wouldn't have to change the track plans too drastically. But of course, me, 15 years old, I didn't really quite understand how complicated that would actually be. And of course, once I started high school, I started to fall away from model trains for a bit, and I had to, and this is probably the case with everybody who's ever been a model railroader as well. However, over time, while I was going through college, I still had that idea in mind of having the train sort of giving the illusion, at least, of going from one place to another. And I always was trying to think in my mind, how can you do that while still saving space? Now, this was the last layout that I had before I got my house in West Virginia. This is what I had in my garage here in McLean, Virginia. It was just two loops. I tried to mix it up a little bit by having the yard outside the main loop, along with a little spur at a freight station with a milk car stand here, but obviously it still suffers from the same problem. Now, you guys probably saw this from the video that I first posted, but I have so much room to play with. In fact, I have more room than I even know what I can think to do with. And I'm only going to be using one half of the room. I'm only going to use one side of it, because the other side that you probably saw has chairs and a rug and a smart TV. And of course, it doesn't make sense to extend the train layout all the way out there, because then it would just be overwhelming. And of course, you still need people still need to be able to get in and out of that basement. So I'm confining it to one side of the layout, but one side of the basement. But that's not a problem for me, because you guys saw the layout. The basement's already pretty big. But that brings me to the current plan that I have for this layout. Allow me to introduce to you the plan. I'm calling it the Summit Point and Eastern Scenic Railroad. Summit Point comes from the town where my home is, and it's running east because, well, I'll explain in a minute. So as you can see, it's still keeping the two interconnected loop design. However, instead of it just being two simple interconnected loops, it's really only the outer loop that is the simple running loop that has no special flourishes or anything, apart from some spurs leading into a yard and roundhouse and turntable, which again I'm going to talk about later. But it's really the inner loop that is the more interesting portion to me. This really solves the whole problem of how to convey the idea that trains are moving from one place to another. So instead of having a simple loop, you just have you sort of squish it down, and you squish down the loops at both ends, the loop at both ends, and have them connect to switches like this. So, and this can really only be done with O scale and 3-rail track, because if you try to do this with HO or N or any other scale, this is going to require a lot of complicated wiring, which obviously, since I'm primarily O scale, so I don't have to worry about that. But I imagine that HO would have a much more difficult time. But this effectively solves the problem of having the trains just jaunt around. Instead, they do circle around a country town here. This is going to be, I'm calling this Summit Point for now, but I may change it later. And then the train will double back and head over here to another loop, another reversing loop, circling a bigger city. And this is where I'm going to model it after a city in Maryland, something like Baltimore. As a matter of fact, and when we get further along, you guys will see some of the buildings I have. One of them is a big Baltimore and Ohio passenger station with the name Hagerstown on it. So this is going to be Hagerstown, Maryland, hence Summit Point and Eastern Scenic Railroad. Now, apart from that, there is also something else that I always wanted to do with my train layouts, but just never could because I didn't have enough money or I didn't have enough space, and that was have an elevated line, which is this purple line right here. As you can see, it's in a typical dog bone shape. It's just a simple loop, nothing really too elaborate. But it's going to be mounted on stilts or on some kind of rock pier. Haven't gotten that far yet. But it's going to be elevated above the rest of the track so that it adds a little bit more variety and interest in interesting visuals to the layout. So here we have a train going up through a bridge. I have a Hell Gate bridge, which I'm going to put right here, and part of this elevated loop will be obscured by a large. Oh, no, don't want to do that. Part of the loop will be obscured by a large mountain, which I'm going to build right here, and this is to convey, the train moving away from the country scene and then out over to the city scene over here. This is probably, and I think having that transition in the mountain is probably the best way to convey that. And I figure, okay, well, since I'm building a mountain, why not have an elevated train run through it? As a matter of fact, if you live in the tri-state area like I do, you've probably been out to Harper's Ferry. And, of course, Harper's Ferry has this big railroad bridge that cuts across the Shenandoah River and into the mountains on the West Virginia side. So it just seemed to fit right in. So this is just going to be a simple loop, having a single train run through a bridge and into and out of a mountain. Now over here is where things get more interesting. Now, I've always loved yards. I love the variety of play value that you can have. I love the idea of switching cars and making up your trains just by switching cars alone in and out of a yard track, because not only that, but it also saves a good amount of space that you would otherwise need more shelves for. You can just put freight cars on here, and it would just function like a normal yard in real life. This yard is going to be much bigger and more elaborate than any yard I've ever built. So let me just take you guys back. As you can probably see from my previous layouts, the yard is not really that elaborate. You have a couple spurs, maybe some light industry here and there, but it's nothing really too elaborate. I think this is the most elaborate it ever got, but even then I didn't really have any accessories like car loaders or anything like that next to the spurs. But here this will fit in perfectly with the city because this is going to be all industry. So as a matter of fact, one thing I plan to do is have each track be dedicated to a certain kind of industry. So say like a culvert loader and unloader here, or you have coal loaders and log loaders here. Each track is dedicated to a specific kind of car that serves a specific kind of industry. And it would fit very well with the city theme because, most cities, they have industrial areas that are right on the edge of town, and they usually serve some kind of, and there's usually some transport that leads directly to that industrial area, and more often than not in big metropolitan areas, it happens to be trains. Now for the final piece, and that is the turntable. Now, I'm pretty sure that having a big roundhouse and turntable is something that pretty much every model railroader has always wanted on their layout, and I am no exception. I remember playing with Thomas the Tank Engine as a kid, and the roundhouse and turntable was always the big centerpiece in my layouts that I would build with Thomas, and that's going to be the same case here. Because actually, if let me zoom out, as you can see, the roundhouse and turntable is right smack dab in the middle of the layout, meaning that it's going to be the focal point. It's where it'll be the first thing that everybody sees when you're gathered around here. And by the way, I should mention that this is not going to take up the entire wall. There's going to be some space over here for people to sit. I intend to have space all around this area for people to sit at different points so that I can get different perspectives of the layout. But the turntable and roundhouse is really the centerpiece of the whole thing. Now, I've never had a turntable ever in my model railroading career. So this is going to be a new venture for me. I have thought about it. I'm thinking of getting just the simple Atlas O turntable, which I will show up on screen. But that one seems to be the most user-friendly, the most beginner-friendly. And then we just have a simple bunch of whisker tracks all radiating out over here, and build a roundhouse section to cover some of the tracks. Now, the only problem that I could potentially see coming out of this is the roundhouse and turntable section is jutting up against the elevated track line, and I need to figure out how that's going to work out. But I think it's really going to come down to either shortening the tracks over here or shortening the bridge section over here, which shouldn't be too difficult. Again, this is all really just still in the planning stages, so it's this is really more just about getting down what you want to get out of this layout. And plus, whatever tracks we don't use, I can use to build something else. That pretty much concludes the plan for this layout. I am really looking forward to building this. I think that this is going to be much more elaborate and much more ambitious than anything I've ever built before. I'm hopeful that I can manage to pull off at least most of the things that I have here, because again, even though it's 25 by 10 feet, it's not really taking up the entirety of the wall. It's just taking up most of it. And also I should say that I meant to say this, but it should be mentioned that my primary inspiration for this design actually comes from RBP trains. I really love Chris's channel. I really love the layout design that he did with having two settlements on two towns at either end. And I love the way that he structured the layout to give the impression of the trains moving from one place to another, and also allowing the trains to be much longer than they otherwise would. So I really wanted to emulate that in some way. As a matter of fact, earlier versions of this plan were essentially inspired by RBP trains. It was essentially going to be a copy of what RBP trains did. But I had to revise it down to be this because You probably saw, but there's a gigantic column in the way. That's actually where the generator room is. I don't know why it's in the middle of the basement, but hey, that's how the builder made it, so I gotta make do with that. I don't want people to be blocked from getting in through. We have a sliding door on this side, and so we want people to be able to walk around the layout as they come in from this side or as they come down the stairs from this side. So that necessitated me changing the structure of the inner loop to be what you see here. But I think that this is doable. It's really gonna, of course, I still have to consult with a professional layout builder and a professional carpenter and ask him, hey, can we do this? Which hopefully will be the next video that I get to put out to you guys on this channel. So stay tuned for that. Until then, thank you so much for watching. Hopefully I didn't bore you too much with all of this. Let me know your thoughts about this. If you have suggestions about how I can make this plan better, I would definitely love to hear it. So until then, thank you so much, and goodbye for now.